Hey everybody, Zeal Brothers here once again, and going to talk about the story of Chicago crime. And there was an interesting story done by CBS Chicago where they detailed a carjacking that happened to this couple who had a 19-month-old son. And as they were trying to get in the car, and they were kind of silly with it because they started the car, put the boy in there, and then went back in the house and came back, and now they're getting carjacked. So it's just one of those things where you shouldn't really do it that way. But at the same time, this carjacking and the description of it, it was kind of scary in some ways because you can kind of feel what they were feeling. The writing of the story was pretty good. And I want you guys just to read it. But the truth of the matter is we have to examine why these things are becoming more and more frequent in both Chicago and in a lot of different major cities. And one of the things that is causing this is first a political cause, and that is that we have made policing so difficult. We made policing so difficult. And how have we made policing so difficult? Two things. One is we're so anti-police, right? The sentiment of respecting the police. It used to be you would watch Sesame Street, and Sesame Street would tell you these people to respect. And the people that they would have to respect would be doctor, firefighter, policeman. They dare not do that anymore because supporting the police has now become a political movement. Now it shouldn't. It shouldn't be a political movement because Christians are supposed to support the enforcement of the law. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white. If you look at Romans 13, you should understand that you should support the enforcement of the government if you want to call yourself a Christian. Now, if you want to be so woke that you don't, then turn in your Christian card. I'll take it gladly. Now, the second cause of this is that we have a growing problem with actually penalizing those who commit crimes. So if you look at New York City, you can commit a crime, you can rob a store, get caught, and be let go that same day, even if it's armed robbery. So what we have are situations where our society is not enforcing the law. Now, what is the law? The law is an attempt to establish order. Ultimately, the law should be to enforce some broad sense of morality, right? The law cannot be morality, but the law should try as much as it can to approximate moral standards that can appeal to a whole branch of society. And that's why it can't exactly be morality. But legality has to be related to morality. That's why you should not steal is in the Bible. And then there'll be a penal code that says if you steal, you will get this kind of penalty. Now, what happens when you don't enforce the law? You lose a sense of morality. You are saying that it is okay for people to steal or it's not that bad. When you say it's not that bad, what do? You increase immorality. The point of the law is to try to obstruct evil. And if we don't obstruct evil, then we allow it to grow. Remember this, that government is a necessary evil. There was no government when Adam and Eve were in the garden. There was no government. Government wasn't truly established until after the flood. After the flood, Noah met with God and God said this: if a man takes a man's life, take that man's life. That was the first establishment of a penal code. You got to realize that before that, there was no capital punishment. In other words, there was no government. Why do we have government? We have government because of evil. And so if government doesn't restrain evil, it's not doing its most basic duty. If government doesn't restrain evil, what do? We have growing immorality. We have growing immorality. That means we create more and more victims. But there's something else that happens, and that's one thing that we don't talk a lot about with justice. When we don't have justice, we create anger. And what I mean by that is, imagine that you were a person who had a brother or a sister that got murdered. And that person who murdered your brother or sister, your sibling, got to sit in court. And after 4 years, they were convicted and they got 4 years. And after 4 years, they wanted parole and they're trying to get out. And they're trying to explain how they should have a right to be out in the same society as you. And let's imagine that they get that right. And then let's imagine that you walk past them in the mall. What do you feel? See, we don't appreciate and we don't examine that kind of feeling when we talk about criminal justice reform, because we don't examine the anger that injustice creates. Oftentimes we think about injustice as if somebody deserves 5 years, we gave them 10. But we don't think about the fact that a murderer can walk right next to you, a murderer who killed your brother or sister, and you have to sit there and you can't do anything. And if you say something to him or do something to him, you could be the one that gets convicted of a crime. And your anger is justified because you are seeing a murderer in your face. And by all rights, by all moral laws, any established moral law will say that somebody who murders deserves to die. But you got to see that person. You have to be dragged to court every 5 or 10 years when that person is trying to get out. And they are saying by doing that, I have a right to live, even though I deprived your loved one of their right to live. Ultimately, justice is supposed to be a scale. It's supposed to be some form of a balance. And when we don't balance the action of the evildoer with the right corrective action of justice, we create anger in the victims. And when that anger is not dealt with, what happens with anger that is not dealt with? It creates mental instability. Could we be seeing a rise in mental illness in our society because of a rise of injustice? And not the kind of injustice that most people are thinking about. When they think about injustice, they think about enforcement of the law going too far. I'm talking about enforcement of the law that doesn't go far enough. And what happens when people have mental illness? What happens with people whose minds are broken down by rage, who can't handle these feelings? What happens to them? They hurt people. They hurt people. And the cycle goes on. So on Zeal Brothers, we are not going to be supporting criminal justice reform in the sense that we are going to let people off who committed great crimes and pretend they didn't do it. We're going to keep pushing it. And that's why we made the story about Larry Miller earlier. That's where we're going to keep on pushing these ideas, because we care about people's morality. And when a society loses sense of morality, that society is set to die.